On this edition of the program, do the Trump convictions matter? We take a look at the scant evidence and make a few judgments. And are politics getting weirder than ever? We bring on Gabe Fliesher to discuss that, the debates, and a little bit more. It's a great episode. It's all coming up. Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for August 5th. 2024, your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you from Austin, Texas. So, what effects have the Trump convictions had on this race? Well, obviously we don't know. But when has that ever stopped us before? We do have one poll that was conducted by Morning Consult. Let's make sure we don't get anything wrong here. 10,404 registered voters surveyed from the 31st of May to June 2nd, and it shows Trump up one. This is the exact same number that Trump was up in the same poll taken from May 10th to the 12th. The margin of error for that poll is 1%. So, obviously, the lead falls inside of that. So what does that tell us? Not a whole hell of a lot. That's what. I can tell you what the Biden campaign would want to see. They would want to see something closer to what polls have shown for the last year, that if Trump were convicted, he would lose anywhere between 6 and 10% of his support. These were polls that were cited during the primary, and they've been cited throughout anybody who's made the argument that convicted felon should be the permanent prefix of Donald Trump's name. But at least in these early dawning hours, we haven't seen it. Will we? We can't know. We do know that a sailboat without wind just kind of stays in place. And if this race stays where it was before the convictions, after the convictions, then Donald Trump is in a really, really good position. In fact, I would make the argument that Trump giving up a point or two in the general election polling is well worth it for what he has gotten since the decision came down in Manhattan last week. Here's the first thing. It has further consolidated the Republican Pangea. Now, we saw a lot of that come back together with Nikki Haley endorsing Trump a couple weeks ago. But we're talking about some pretty outward islands that have begun flirting with the mainland again, including Susan Collins and Mitt Romney, people who hate Donald Trump. Mitt Romney said that Alvin Bragg, the DA who brought the charges against Trump in Manhattan, had been playing politics. These are never Trump voices, people who never Trump voters listen to. And remember, never Trump voters are partially the reason why Joe Biden is the president right now, because of the decision they made in 2020. Second, it's the money, baby. With all apologies to Dave Leventhal, who was on this very show, the last episode of this very show, making the explicit plea that we not take literally campaign announcements when it comes to fundraising. I'm going to read a campaign announcement when it comes to fundraising. Quote, today, President Trump's campaign, together with the RNC, announced a massive $141 million fundraising haul in May, a response of support for President Trump while facing the sham Biden trial and verdict that outraged and motivated Americans from every walk of life. This overwhelming financial success is the result of over 2 million donations, which came out to an average of $70.27. In addition to the staggering amount, 25% of May's donors were brand new to the 2024 campaign, making this month the best so far. Additionally, organizations supporting President Trump raised another $150 million in May. Taken together, the campaign and other Trump-supporting organizations raised nearly $300 million during the month of May. And that's pretty much all we know. And with that being said, I'm going to talk about Twitter for a second. So on Monday, I wrote the following on Elon Musk's Twitter. No clue how this will play out going forward, but we've yet to see an outlier poll showing big movement after the conviction. Polls stable plus Trump money bomb equals net win for Trump so far. This take was quote tweeted by a man by the name of Lakeisha Jane. I'm sure I butchered that first name, and I apologize, Mr. Jane. But he works at Split Ticket, and I really find his work valuable. I am a fan. I was a follower on Twitter, but he had the following to say. I would really caution against anyone concluding that polls stable plus Trump money bomb equals net win for Trump so far. We haven't even seen enough data to conclude that polls are stable yet. The averages actually shifted slightly in Biden's direction post-conviction. Because Mr. Jane is a respected member of the online poll discourse community, this brought forth a lot of numbers-minded people that wanted to let me know I was jumping the gun. That I should just sit back, take a few weeks off, have a beer, and come back when there's more high-quality data. Which I think are reasonable asks. I would have a few quibbles. Number one, I've got to do a podcast 4 times a week, and your boy needs something to talk about. Number two, I did write I have no idea how this is going to go going forward. And while that might be a little opaque, let me make it clearer for you. By that I meant I have no idea how this is going to go going forward. And number three, regardless of the hard numbers that we see, I do think that there is a little something to add up when you look at the behavior of the main players. Specifically, the Biden 2024 campaign are not acting like this changed the race. They're not talking about a gigantic donation bomb. They're not releasing internal polls showing that this did move things. The Trump campaign is doing the opposite, announcing the money bomb and releasing internal polls saying that it's not going to move anything. In fact, the most vociferous pro-Biden take that I read over the weekend was from our boy, Bill Scher of the Washington Monthly, who said that Donald Trump should drop out. Now that's a take. And then there's the White House itself. They've pivoted away from this news not once, but twice, and to issues that they don't really have a whole lot of momentum on. The first was Israel. That was immediately after the convictions. On Friday, Biden announced a ceasefire plan that, again, puts all the control in Hamas's hands. That's a story for a different day. And then on Tuesday, he announced a border executive order. Again, not exactly dealing from a position of strength. My point is that these are not exactly signs that people around Biden 2024 believe these convictions are something that help them. And if they don't believe it, then why should we believe it? Of course, everything can change. But the fear for people who want President Biden to be reelected has to be increasingly. Maybe it won't. This is your update brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Joe Biden has issued an executive order to turn away migrants seeking asylum who cross the southern border illegally when daily encounters exceed 2,500. That is on a 7-day rolling average, which means it theoretically would be shut down tonight. The action, framed as a response to congressional inaction on immigration reform, contrasts with Trump's broad asylum policies. While the new order aims to address high volumes at the border, it faces potential legal challenges, including one by the American Civil Liberties Union, and criticism from his left for resembling Trump-era policies, specifically the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. The order allows border officials to refuse entries and expedite the expulsion of unauthorized migrants, with exceptions for unaccompanied minors and certain asylum claims. Mexico will accept expedited deportations of nationals from specific countries. The administration will also target smuggling networks and expedite immigration case resolutions. Despite the intent to secure the border, officials acknowledge resource challenges and the possibility of releasing more migrants into the interior. The order's timing coincides with an election year, obviously. So where do we start? Where do we start with this one? Well, let's start all the way at the beginning. Obviously, immigration has changed a lot in my lifetime, It has gone from what was looked at as an absolutely racist fixation with candidates like Patrick Buchanan to surging to the forefront of a lot of Republican dialogue throughout the 2010s. Obviously, that crests with Donald Trump in 2016. Build a wall becomes a huge rallying cry. Trump gets in, puts in immigration policies. Biden comes in, takes away many of those immigration policies. And now the border's a bipartisan issue, in no small part because there's a lot of undocumented migrants that are in big blue cities, stretching some of the resources. You've seen big, gaudy, bipartisan numbers for things like deportations, not just shutting down the border. So Biden knew he had to do something. If we're going to go back to the beginning on Biden's strategy here, and most, I think controversially, Joe Biden took away a Trump policy called Remain in Mexico. Remain in Mexico was you can apply for asylum in America. However, you can't wait for that asylum claim to be heard in America. You've got to wait in Mexico for that asylum claim to be heard. Biden did away with that on day one. Now we have this executive order. It is not Remain in Mexico. However, it does stem some of the asylum claims depending on the flow of migrants into or of documented interactions at the border. This sounds similar to the sweetener that was put on the Ukraine money a few months ago. That was a bipartisan agreement that was negotiated by Senator Langford on the Republican side, Senator Sinema on the Democratic side. That obviously died very controversially. The Ukraine money got forwarded anyway, and it wound up getting passed no matter what. And so you saw a clean version of the border bill get put to the floor and failed resoundingly in the Senate last week. And now you get the executive order. I will say that Chris Clem, a former border sector chief, came on this show, and he has said that the bipartisan agreement was something that he supported. Chris Clem, at least on Twitter today, does not support this executive order. He believes it does not do much. It also does open up some wounds on the left side of Joe Biden's coalition. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus says that this is an unconstitutional and illegal Trump-era strategy. What they wanted was to pair the executive order with not just enforcement, but also something that would be beneficial to some of the undocumented migrants that are already in the country. I don't really know how this affects anything. I think it's a problem that the Biden campaign and White House have had for a while, which is they're not great at building their narratives. The Trump side has already just called this an amnesty bill. Doesn't matter if it is. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that the Biden campaign is going to fight about how it's not an amnesty bill, which means you're just playing catch up. I got a couple commercials that I want to show you guys or play for you guys. These are both from the same nonprofit, one of them in Michigan, one of them in Wisconsin. Obviously, extraordinarily pivotal states for Joe Biden in the election. I'm going to play one, and then we'll play the other, and then we'll talk about it.
Make it in Michigan. It's not just a slogan. It's a rallying cry. And it's what we're doing every single day. Making electric cars that power our economy and our future. And now working with the Biden administration. Batteries that used to be made in China are being made all across our state. And we're training Michigan workers for high-paying jobs in job training centers, just like this. It's good for our health, good for our economy, and it's putting Michigan in the driver's seat.
That is Gretchen Whitmer's ad for Evergreen Collaborative. I'm going to play the Wisconsin version, but I want you guys to play a little game with me called What's Not Mentioned. What's not mentioned? Here's the Wisconsin version of Evergreen Collaborative's ad boosting Democrats and specifically Joe Biden in key swing states.
The morning light. It's not just pretty, it's powerful. And now it's set to energize over 750,000 Wisconsin homes. And Governor Evers is working with the Biden administration to do even more, like this project, where homes are being retrofitted with energy-saving windows, appliances, and better insulation. So your home value goes up and your energy bill goes down.
Wisconsinites, this is the future we've spent years working hard to build together.
All right. Who got it? What's not mentioned? Could it be the bill that put all of that in place? Could it be the Inflation Reduction Act? The big bill that was sold as an economic booster to reduce inflation, but now is almost strictly referred to as the biggest environmental bill in a generation. Well, now it's being sold like the biggest environmental bill in a generation. That is Governor Evers and, of course, Governor Whitmer, Michigan and Wisconsin. And this gets back to the narrative thing. Like, either you're the green dude or you're not. You can't be half Ralph Nader. You can't. One or the other. Either you love oil or you love green. Pick one. Speaking of somebody that loves green, Senator Bob Menendez is currently on trial for corruption and bribery charges, but is filing for re-election for his Senate seat in New Jersey as an independent. Despite calls from the Senate Democratic Caucus for him to resign, Menendez submitted the necessary signatures to run independently. The New Jersey Globe, which first reported the news, noted Menendez has no campaign staff. Representative Andy Kim is expected to win the Democratic primary for Menendez's seat. If acquitted, Menendez could potentially disrupt the November election, though his support in the state remains uncertain. A conviction would likely force his resignation, paving the way for Kim. Kim has criticized Menendez, stating Americans are tired of politicians prioritizing personal gain over public interest. I don't think this is enough to put a Republican in the New Jersey Senate seat. Is it enough to make the Democrats spend money in New Jersey when they wouldn't otherwise spend money in New Jersey? Maybe. And before we move on, I want to talk about one other blue seat that could be challenged by a Republican, and that's in Maryland. Because while I mentioned before that Mitt Romney and Susan Collins have brought the Republican Pangea closer together, there was a couple notable exceptions. One of them, primary candidate Asa Hutchinson, and the other, Republican candidate for Senate in Maryland, former Governor Larry Hogan. Larry Hogan said that people should respect the will of the jury. This was greeted by derision from Chris LaCivita, the head of the Trump campaign, and RNC co-chair Laura Trump. Now, I don't know exactly what's going on here. I think that Larry Hogan is somebody that very much believes he is an independent mind. And I believe that the RNC obviously is rallying around their standard bearer in Donald Trump. They believe that it is very important that everybody repeat in unison that this is a political frame-up job. A part of me also thinks it might be a false flag, because I think it's better for MAGA to have somebody to punch, and Larry Hogan is pretty punchable by MAGA standards. But it also might be the only way that Larry Hogan can get elected in that seat if he legitimately looks like, I'm a rhino. I'm a Republican in name only. But you liked me as governor. You'd like an independent-minded senator, like you like an independent-minded governor. Look, nobody likes me. My party doesn't like me. Your party doesn't like me. But you don't like your party right now. So why don't you vote for me? False flag Hogan. That's what I'm saying. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you go to support this show. You get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. Our Sunday edition was immaculate. That comes out first thing Monday morning. That's your first listen each and every Monday. Kick your podcast week off right. And it was amazing because DC cares about these shows. You get to see the political chessboard be filled up. And part of my priors for how I'm looking at how the Democrats and the Biden White House are treating this conviction was filled in by what happened on the Sunday shows, where you didn't see any big name surrogates go after Trump, but you did see a few talk about Israel. Pay attention to what they pay attention to, and you are smarter. Even better, you don't have to. Just let me do it for you. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 level gets you 2 bonus episodes each and every week. And now, our interview with the one, the only, Gabe Fleisher. You would be certainly understandable, if not in the majority, if you believe that politics has never been more chaotic. But, as Gabe Fleisher of the Wake Up to Politics newsletter wrote last week, maybe it just means that you need to read a little bit more American history. We welcome one of our favorites, Gabe, back to the show. Gabe, you mentioned in your article that things might not quite be as chaotic as they once were if you actually take a look back.
That's right. I wrote in my newsletter recently. I wrote in response to a tweet by someone named David Roberts, who writes a very smart newsletter on Substack. He writes about climate policy, and he expressed a view on Twitter that, like you said, I think a lot of people hold, that American politics right now has gotten uniquely crazy. Basically, the people used to, comport by certain norms, the people used to behave, act properly, and now, he says in the last decade or so, things have just gone off the rails. And, I think this is clearly a view a lot of people hold. And I think, like you said, I think the more you look into history, I just don't think it holds up. I think, one thing that does occur to me, he used the word norms there. And I think it perhaps is true that we do see recently a lot of politicians increasingly violating norms. But I think it's important to note when you look back in American political history, for most of it, those norms never existed at all. So you look at a lot of the examples he notes, things like Supreme Court justices becoming more partisan. That wasn't even a norm for a lot of history. Supreme Court justices used to be openly partisan, advise presidents, advise political figures, openly advocate for what they wanted. He talks about shooting puppies, which obviously Kristi Noem did. Obviously that's, kind of a weird, quirky political story. But the truth is that there used to be nothing common for politicians to shoot people. And we had, actual duels, including a vice president who famously shot a former cabinet secretary in a duel, as well as members of Congress caning each other on the floor of Congress. Political violence used to be much more normalized than it is now. So I think if you look at a lot of different metrics, whether it's, just basic polarization and division or violence or, any of these kind of chaotic metrics, I think it's very popular now to look at politics and think, oh my gosh, things have gotten so crazy. It's so wild. Don't you remember back in the good old days, everyone used to behave? And then you start to look into the so-called good old days, and there was a lot more misbehavior than I think people like to remember.
I also think that part of this is that there's a lot, if not an entire generation of people that really only started to pay attention to politics in 2016. And even stuff that happened during the Obama era, let alone the Bush era or the Clinton era before it, are something that, either because of youth or because they had other things to do, there was a more vibrant cultural buffet to pick from, which now among the only things that we all pay attention to are politics. Mm-hmm. That it's like to me, Kristi Noem saying that she shot a puppy is notable in that it shows that Kristi Noem has a very weird decision on editorial choices for her own hagiography biography. But it doesn't suggest anything super weird in terms of the line in which politicians are coming from.
Right. And I think if anything, I think that's exactly right. And I think if anything, the fact that a prominent writer chose that as an example of why politics are so weird is an example in of itself of what has really changed in politics, which I do think you're right, that a lot more people are paying attention to it, and it's a lot easier to pay attention to. Something like Kristi Noem shooting her puppy, it can go viral now because of social media. And, a lot of people, in response to the tweet that I wrote the news response to, they pointed to social media as kind of the cause of why everything had gone so crazy and why everything got off the rails. I think that's close, but not quite the story, which is, in my opinion, that social media has what's been able to make us to be able to watch that everything's going so crazy. It's put it in front of our faces. So it's not that politics has become uniquely abnormal. It's that there was always this kind of stuff going on. But now, as you say, I think both in the Trump era, where interest in politics has kind of skyrocketed, but then also just in the age of social media, where it's very easy to access political news and to follow what's going on, we can suddenly see right in front of our faces all the kind of bizarre, scandalous, crazy things going on that I think always were going on in American politics, but were much harder to communicate, in the 1850s, 1960s, what have you.
Because, all right, so let's take the Kristi Noem story, and let's put it back in 1992. If this happens in 1992, and I'm sure that if we actually put elbow grease into us, you could probably find something similar that happened around then. But it would probably play out in the following way. Maybe it would get a joke on a late night show. Maybe it warrants an article in the Post. And you might get some inside the Republican tent dunking on her in a partisan publication like the National Review or something like that. But that's all content that you could probably totally consume in about a half hour. The way that it played out here, not only did you get Democrats dunking on her constantly, you got Republicans who did not like her dunking on her, and then you have a plethora of political media, specifically political comedy media, that could not wait to create multiple different jokes, songs, commentary, all about this one very bizarre moment. I would say just by weighing the content, it's got to be, 100x.
Right. And then I think you multiply that by, every day we have a new one of these. Every day there's a new kind of incident like that. And so suddenly you get why people are kind of weeding through and sifting through, the whole tonnage of this. And they're like, oh my gosh, like things have gone so crazy because they are being bombarded by stories about things being crazy. When in fact, I think those stories were always there. But exactly like you said, it would have been a brief. I mean, I think to be honest, for the Kristi Noem thing, the best example is probably Mitt Romney with his dog, on the roof of the car, which I think that took place, in the 80s, but it's from the 2012 election. And that was, a story in the 2012 election. And I think Gail Collins famously, in the New York Times would work it into every column that she could. And it was a late night joke, like you say. But, certainly, I don't know that this will sink Kristi Noem's career, but nobody talked about that like that was the end of Mitt Romney's career, because there was the example, obviously, he didn't kill the dog, he put it on the roof. But either way, there was no talk as though that was sinking any hopes he had at national politics. So I think that was even from just about 10 years ago or so. You do see the escalation in how little stories like this can totally become news cycles in a different way. But that doesn't mean there wasn't kind of little bits like that always happening throughout history.
Well, also, the Mitt Romney thing happened when he was running for president, right? And that's another thing that I do think that we've lost, is that in a bygone era, before politics was a dominant cultural fixture, there was a bit of a rest period. Gabe, you're younger than I am, but there used to be a moment where nobody wanted to hear you talk about politics for 3 years. And then there was one shining, beautiful year where political nerds, people would want to hear the opinions of people that paid attention to this stuff all 4 years. Now there's no off season. So the fact that we're even going down the rung to say Kristi Noem's career as a national politician might be altered by the fact that she had this totally Looney Tunes biography, which shows some questionable judgment on the story she put in there and how much she had to do with it, considering the other part was that she was talking to world leaders that she apparently hasn't. But that's so down the road. That used to be the most neckbeardy of neckbeardy political nerd things, and now it is so much front and center, which I guess you can understand. Okay, well, that in terms of the perspective is crazy, even if these events aren't.
Right. And I want to be clear. I think what you're describing, where kind of most people don't pay attention to politics a lot of the year, obviously, you host a podcast, politics. I read a newsletter make with politics. Obviously, we're knee deep in politics, and I love politics.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what you're describing, that is a very healthy way for a country to operate. I do think that is, in a lot of ways, a lot preferable. I mean, it's good that a lot of people are interested in politics now and following politics more than they were a few years ago. But yes, I think it's very healthy. And I think, something I wrote in the piece is, this idea of politics as mega identity, that I think one of the reasons why people take things like Kristi Noem and then suddenly blow it out into being, part of, existential threats to democracy and treat everything with just this kind of dramatic lens, is I do think there is an extent to which politics has become, like you say, not only an all-consuming kind of national pastime to watch, but because it's become so wrapped up in all these other identifiers that we have, whether it's where you live, what you do for work, where you pray, where you go to the grocery store, what car you drive, all these things that used to be, all these different cross-cutting identities that might tell you, all sorts of different things about you. Now, for many people, that's kind of cohered into one identity where all of those things likely point you in one political direction. And I do think that has kind of led to this scenario where people, because it's wrapped up in so many other parts of who they are, people take politics a lot more seriously, which, again, can be good because it's good for people to care about the future of their country, but can also lead, obviously, to this kind of tribal endpoint where people are fighting over everything like it's so existential. But also, I want to be clear, and that is, again, not preferable and not good, but also not entirely new. I mean, if you go back to, again, the Revolutionary War or the Civil War or other periods in our history, again, politics were all around us. It was all people talked about. You walked around and that was, kind of the topics that were in the air and they were inescapable. Again, those are at points in the country's history when there was war, and that's obviously not, again, a healthy point. It's not healthy for that to be where the country is. But it's not entirely new, but I do think compared to the last few decades, politics has taken on this kind of, mega import to a lot of people and kind of dramatic level that has led, some of these kind of smaller incidents to bubble up into, in some people's eyes, kind of crises.
I would like to push back very slightly at the idea that it's very good that people follow politics very closely. In that, yes, it's important that people understand and educate themselves on the choices that are put forth to them. Yes, it is very important that people identify issues that they feel are really important to them, and they not only educate the candidates that might make those changes for them or punish those that go against them. That being said, anybody who spends a lot of time in this world understands that the actual mechanics of politics is very often the art of hyperbole. And let's take Mitt Romney, for example. The idea that he had a dog on his roof because his kids desperately wanted a dog on their vacation. That could be a silly story that everybody tells at Thanksgiving. Or it could be, in the context of that election, a sign that Mitt Romney's a sociopath who doesn't see value in life that the family dog represented. That obviously is a hyperbolic statement that goes beyond it. One that I don't think anybody would ascribe to Mitt Romney now, even the people that were saying it then, back in 2012. So the reality of this game is that you want to get people into a booth and hit your button. And when you live inside the funhouse mirror world, which I think we very much have, I can come around to the position that if all you're doing is looking at distended bellies and flat heads, that you might come out screaming, why do all these people have distended bellies and flat heads?
Yeah, and I agree with you completely, and I want to be clear. When I said it's a good thing more people are paying attention to politics, I mean it in exactly the way you said it. I think it is a positive good for a democracy, for people to be informed about their choices, to care about issues, to, call up members of Congress and to be following elections with the candidates. I do not think that extends into it is good then for people to be, on Twitter 24/7 yelling at each other about politics or taking every, mini story and blowing it up or even, people putting politics before, their personal lives or letting politics get in the way of relationships or all these things, I do not think are positive good. So I think there is a line there. And I do think, yes, that what I try to sort out in the piece is I don't think politics have become uniquely crazy. I think any kind of survey of history will tell you that. But I do think there are things in our politics that have changed, and we should talk about what those are. And that clearly is one of them, this kind of level of political engagement that we see in kind of, obsession with politics as kind of a national obsession. That clearly has escalated in the past few years.
Yeah, that's the thing that's troubling for me, is that we have engagement on a level that is, I would hope that people would look at situations like we've lived in for the last 8 years and they would say, wow, this is kind of a weird world to live in. Isn't it kind of odd that there is just this game of competitive persuasion that happens, and sometimes the takes are crazy. Sometimes the takes are reasonable. Sometimes the people are as loony as they seem. Sometimes it's a bit of a caricature. But at the end of the day, we can all put down our arms and at least understand that things got a little heated. It's kind of like the end of that, the scene after the Anchorman fight scene, where it's just like, wow, that got out of hand. I would hope that we haven't seemed to get to the second part yet. There's a lot of competitive fighting, but then again, I almost wonder whether or not that is just an example of our continued adolescence of an internet connected society, where I think now we're starting to realize that Twitter is closer to 4chan than it is the Encyclopedia Britannica. It is not exactly the marketplace of ideas, or sometimes the marketplace of ideas can be a bit of a dirty place to hang out. But I hope people understand that issues are important, but politics can be an extraordinarily hyperbolic, silly place.
I mean, I think, maybe a lot of political obsessives don't understand that. I mean, I think if you look at polling, I do think a lot of people have reached that place. I mean, you look at the level. I mean, again, we were talking about political engagement. That was very true in 2016, in 2020. So people can kind of sustain, let's say, 2 election cycles of kind of high engagement and really caring about politics and paying very closely. But then look at engagement in this cycle, and it's plummeted. And people have kind of, I do think, reached the point a little bit where they're fed up with it. I mean, if you look at ratings, if you look at cable news ratings, are dropping. Page views for a lot of political websites are dropping. And then you look at polling and you ask people, are you excited by, are you interested in this election? And again in polls, majority of Americans say no. Like, we don't like our choices. We're not happy. We're tuned out. We're disengaged. So I don't know. I think maybe, here in Washington, not everyone has reached that kind of place you're talking about. But across the country, just going off of, I guess anecdotally based on conversations with people, but also if you go off survey data, I do think a lot of people have reached that point where they're kind of like, okay, that was fun and interesting and wild for a few years, but like, can we get back to the real world, please? Like, can we just calm down? Can we have, normal candidates in a normal election that I don't have to pay attention to because I would like to pay attention to other things? I think that actually is describing the perspective of a fair number of Americans right now.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And I think if there's one thing to look at the numbers and take some kind of heart in, is that we have 2 very unpopular candidates and people find them unpopular, right? So it's not like a super highly polarized situation where it's like, oh, we have an unpopular candidate, but yet their partisan popularity is like crazy in a scary way. The story of this election is going to be the double haters, as they are called, people who really don't like Biden and really don't like Trump, and to see who can motivate them out of the house.
I think that's exactly right. And I think, that, and it is striking to me because, again, this is the 3rd election in which we've had somewhat unpopular candidates. So that's not new. And that, I think the double haters, that kind of idea that was coined this cycle, but, it's been the same thing. The people that disapproved of both Trump and Clinton went for Trump, and that helped him win. And then and people who disapproved of Trump and Biden went for Biden in 20, and that helped him win. And so we have had these several cycles of unpopular candidates. But again, if you look at polling, this is the first one where that kind of engagement has dropped off, where people see that, and then they're like, oh, and that makes me not want to pay attention. That makes me not care that much, and that makes me want to check out. So I do think, that is a change we're seeing, and perhaps kind of a reversion to normal levels of kind of political engagement, which I think both of us agree is kind of a healthy thing. But in the meantime, I do think we're still left with some of these kind of hyperbolic claims about, our levels of division and vitriol, which I think are high. But I do think, this kind of perspective is important to look back in previous eras and just kind of realize that we most certainly have been here before, and in the past it's been a lot worse.
Now, that's healthy for other people, but not for us, weirdo obsessives that focus on this stuff all the time. So let me pivot to something else. We have this month the earliest that any kind of debates have happened in our general election. It's going to be the first time that the debates have happened inside of a television studio since 1960, when the practice began with Kennedy and Nixon. Are you a debate guy? Do you find that they are important, or are they a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing?
I mean, again, as one of those weirdo political obsessives, I mean, I love a debate night. I mean, I think it's fascinating to sit down and to watch, especially think of these two men, we have not seen either of them debate in 4 years now. That's a very rare case to have two presidential nominees go through, and we went through an entire primary and haven't seen them debate since 4 years ago, when, by the way, they were debating each other. And so, we will, in a cycle where age is kind of at the center, we are going to see very clearly, we can put side by side, we saw how they debated in 2020, and we'll see 4 years later, can both of them debate to the same rigor? Can they, and neither of these men, by the way, are known for their kind of, rhetorical, debating mastery, but we'll see, the extent to which they can kind of hold their own against each other 4 years later. And I think there's a lot of questions about both of them, whether they can. So I think that'll be fascinating to watch. In general, I mean, it is almost impossible to point to a debate that has, in terms of whether they are actually genuinely important for an election, it's very hard to point to a debate that has made much of a difference in an election cycle. Almost always. And you see now, again, if we're still waiting to see the polling on Trump's conviction, but I think certainly at the very least, I think a lot of people will be surprised if his favorability numbers go anywhere. People know how they feel about these candidates. Obviously, there's a small sliver in the middle who are still deciding who they're going to vote for, and that's important. But, if something like a criminal conviction doesn't change how most people view the candidates, I don't think a debate will either. That's pretty locked in. So I don't think it'll have a huge effect. But, I think especially for Biden, you see, and Trump too to some degree, there's just so many questions about his ability to perform. He rarely does interviews. I think we've talked about in this podcast in the past. That's why moments like the State of the Union was such a big deal, where there's so many eyes on him to see whether he would be able to perform to the level he has in the past. So the debate will be an important moment, but probably more important for a few certain viral moments, more likely than not showing big stumbles or something like that, than for, actually changing the tenor of the race that much.
I think the debates are important, but they tend to be important because they cement narratives that already exist, and they very rarely mint new ones. And so, for example, Trump in 2020 with Biden wouldn't shut up, kept fighting with Chris Wallace. Biden hits him with the man shut up, and boom, there you go. That's exactly the moment that Biden wanted. This guy's a blowhard. We don't need a blowhard in a pandemic. Give the adult the keys. There you go. Exactly what he needed. And, that wound up being what we understand to be the story of that election. Functionally, the bad news for Biden is that usually what you read about in some of the internal campaign postmortems is that the first debate is a very helpful thing for the incumbent, because it usually snaps the incumbent out of their, I'm the president, everybody caters to me, and snaps them into the idea of, I'm a candidate, I need to be doing more work on this, I need to focus on what I need to focus on. Because you've seen bad first debates from incumbents, from Obama against Romney, certainly Trump against Biden most recently. That's been something that's happened.
And all of that is true, but the big difference this time, a big part of why that is, because you're exactly right, historically, first debates for incumbent presidents go terribly. But a big part of why that is because usually they're very out of practice. They did not have to face any primary challenger. Certainly they didn't debate any primary challenger, so they haven't debated for 4 years. Whereas the person on the other side usually has gone through. I mean, Biden in 2020, he is no star debater. But during the 2020 primaries, at the very least, he had to go through several debates where he had to face down Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Leon Castro, et cetera, et cetera. And at least, was prepping and having to work in his debating chops before he went against Trump. This time we have a very unique case where neither of them have debated. So normally that kind of advantage that Trump might have in that he had gone through a primary cycle where he had kind of been prepping again and again for debates and kind of working on his debating chops, whereas the incumbent president had not, that goes out the window because neither of them have. And the truth is, Trump too, he could have. A lot of Republicans wanted him. It's exactly what Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis said. It's, if you're going to be our nominee, come on stage and answer our questions. It will only make you a better candidate because you will have to, face our challenges. And he didn't. And so he has not been in a scenario either in 4 years where he's been challenged. He also kind of lives in this kind of bubble of his creation. He is not the incumbent president, but, he still kind of lives at Mar-a-Lago as if he is one, flies in the plane, and goes relatively unchallenged, by all reports from the aides around him and also from the larger party. Even though he did have candidates running against him for the nomination, he never subjected himself to being on a stage with them and having to actually respond to their critiques. So I think you're very right that the first debate for an incumbent president normally goes poorly, and we very well could see that repeat again. But it is important to note that a big part of why is because of that kind of difference in preparedness. But the reality is, I think right now we're going to have two candidates who neither of them have really prepared themselves to kind of hear challenges, especially in a moment when there are a lot of challenges to both of their candidacies, and they've never really had to answer for any of them. They mostly only give interviews in kind of friendly bubbles. So, this is going to be a rude awakening, I think, for both of them.
I very much believe that this is going to be the no after you debate, or at least it should be. That's what their I think their teams are going to be prepping them for, because the fastest way to victory for either of them in this kind of rhetorical combat is let the other guy talk. If you're Trump, you desperately want Joe Biden to be extemporaneously going off the top of his head. Biden just did a rare interview with Time, and in the unedited transcript, he confuses Putin for Xi. That's the exact kind of moment that Donald Trump wants to have on stage. And then meanwhile, for Biden, the best thing that he could want is for Donald Trump to go on and on about a bunch of things that are unpopular that Trump loves to talk about, like the 2020 election, January 6th, and judges in New York that he hates. Like that's what Biden wants. He wants him to do that, and when he's not doing that, arguing with Jake Tapper, because that's the exact moment. But both of them are relying on the other one to talk more.
Right, and the issue, of course, being that both of them love to talk. So both shutting up, not something that either of them are known for doing. So I think you're exactly right. Politically, all their advisors want, shut up, stop talking, what are you doing? And yet, these are both expert talkers. So I don't know if we'll...
Big blowhards from Mount Olympus. Guys that have always sucked the air out of the room, no matter what room. It's going to be fascinating. I'm very excited. I do think that it is it's a more interesting debate than I can remember, in that it's novel, right? Never had debates this early. This is the first time that we've had it without the commission on presidential debates for a very long time. And also there is this weird vibe hanging around the Biden campaign that this feels like there's a lot of pressure from within Democratic circles that this needs to mean something on some kind of level, because we've seen a lot of moments that could have, should have, or might have changed at least what we're seeing in the polling right now, and that has yet to be the case. Do you read it like that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think one of the interesting things about Biden, something that I've been doing the last few weeks, and I think, for your listeners, this is kind of an interesting, I think, thing to get into. If you go to the White House website, they post the transcripts of anything that he says out loud, obviously, publicly. And that includes kind of for closed door fundraisers. And I think a habit I've gotten to is reading very closely if you look at what Biden is saying at closed-door fundraisers. And we just had one last night where he kind of, for the first time, called Trump a convicted felon, says he shouldn't be running for president. And it's always very striking to me. If you see the case that Biden is making a lot of these fundraisers, you see he talks a lot about January 6th. He really takes the fight to Trump in a lot of ways, in a way that we almost never see in public. You can trace, because Biden tells a lot of the same stories and does a lot of the same anecdotes, wherever he speaks. And
Yes.
yet you can see at some of these fundraisers, and then you see that kind of story, and then you see an added line that he doesn't always say in public that really kind of goes at the jugular as he's trying to get people's money and trying to whip up Democrats to vote for Trump. I think a lot of Democrats really want him to be saying those in public. And, there's been a lot of attention on the fact that Trump, obviously he's, been in courts, 4 days a week, so he hasn't done a lot of campaign events. But Biden, too, has not been, it's not like he's been barnstorming across the country campaigning either. To your point, that's partly because it's in his best strategy to kind of cede the stage to Trump. But still, I think you're exactly right. There's a lot of Democrats that really want him taking the fight to Trump. And something I find very interesting is in closed-door settings, I think we see a lot of evidence that he is doing that. You see that in these fundraisers with fairly potent attack lines that he kind of returns to again and again. And then, he gets in front of the cameras. We saw you see things like the other day where he's at that news conference. He's asked a question about Trump, and he kind of just stands and grins and walks away in a very weird moment.
Gives a weird smile.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's very odd. And it's
as soon as I saw that, I'm like, just make the attack ad there.
Right.
You don't have to edit it. And then they did exactly that. They just didn't edit it.
And it seems like he's just afraid to engage. And I think there is this kind of balance. Biden envisions himself as, this kind of statesman, as kind of a president who's above politics, who, at least says he wants to unify things. And he doesn't want to get into the muck with, a convicted felon or raise any kind of suspicions that, he's trying to politicize, the prosecution or have had some role in it. But exactly like you said, there's a lot of Democrats that are saying, no, you do need to get into the muck. If Trump is there, you need to join him, or at the very least, you need to show people that you have some aggression, some fight left in you. And I think there are a lot of Democrats that'll be watching the debate, that he isn't just kind of standing grinning like that. I think to your point, yes, it's in his best interest that Trump talks, but he can't be a shadow at the debate. He has to be a real presence. He has to be a forceful presence.
Yeah.
Think of his 2012 debate against Paul Ryan. That's exactly what he was. I mean, he was, there was a point where Joe Biden was a very strong attack dog debater. That's no one's perception of him anymore. And so I think it's kind of tricky because he has to do both. He does have to give Trump a lot of airtime to get Trump to say unpopular things and to get him. But he also needs to reverse the perception of him that, he can't really speak off the cuff and that he can't take the fight to Trump.
And that's the big question is, does the 2012 Joe Biden live here anymore? Because that was, if you talk about debates that did have an effect on the narrative of the election, his did. It showed Paul Ryan to be kind of not ready for prime time. It showed him to be a fighter, and whether or not people thought he was being over aggressive, it didn't matter because the point got across, and it made Paul Ryan look small. So I don't think that even 2012 Biden could run over Trump, because I don't think anybody can run over Trump. But that'll be very, very interesting. Anyway, Gabe Fleisher, Wake Up to Politics newsletter. Everybody go ahead and get on it. I've always said it is one of my favorite reads of the political day. Thank you so much for coming by, Gabe.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin. Always great to talk to you.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. You want to email me, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Got a great email this weekend mentioning the first roll call that somebody remembers seeing was for a libertarian convention. And I wrote them back immediately because I have the exact same memory. And I wonder if it was the same convention. But I remember watching a libertarian convention roll call, had to be on C-SPAN. And the moment that I will remember till the day I die was the person representing the delegates from Iowa who said, "The delegation of Iowa soon to be the home birth state of James Tiberius Kirk. And at that moment, I knew everything I needed to know about libertarians, and to be totally frank with you, I wasn't wrong. Anyway, theyoungamerican@gmail.com if you got anything on your mind that you want to email me about. Find us on TikTok, Justin R. Young, Instagram, Justin R. Young, YouTube, Politics. All right, guys, the YouTube is popping. I love having this representation. I love doing video stuff. It is just a great time. So youtube.com/@politics. In fact, I want to do a little thing here, because this is always fun. If you've never seen what I look like, head to youtube.com/@politics. Take a look at me, and I want you to compare and contrast the vision you had in your head listening to me audio only for oh so many years and what I actually look like. Because I found it's a pretty fun gulf between the two, usually. My Twitter account is Justin R. Young. Podcast is px3podcast.com. You can support this show, paypal.me/payjury on PayPal. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3 Cash. You can send me anything you'd like in the mail. P.O. Box 1531, 84, Austin, Texas, 78715. Of course, the only place to get our bonus content is TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 tier gets you 2 bonus podcasts per week covering all the news we miss on our free podcasting schedule. And our $10 tier gets your name right at the end of the show like these fine folks in the Titanic. $10 tier. Including Sugar, Brady, Sam, John, Niemeister, Edwin, and vote Gloria Young for King of the New World Order, Brian, Edison, Jeremy, a dog named Checkers, Sarah Jeannie, Matthew, Dr. G, Shad, Bob, Chill, Dustin, Brad, D. Laser, Nick, Just Another Pilot, Middle-Aged Mike, Utah, Jimmy, Montana, The Jen, Alo, D. Really, Andrew, Lisa, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Devon, the CFP, Gloria, Gray Zone, Peepaw, Jay, Neil, John, DP4 Bongo, Neil is Nerdiness Charles, Audrey Stoll Adler's Spot, Darren, Idris Arslanian, Berkeley Steven, Pneumatic Terran, Molly's Delightful Demeanor, Adam, Chief Andy, Robert, Casey, Paul, and Bluefront, and the Lenina. You want your name right at the end of the show? Only one place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. On Friday's edition of the show, we bring on one of our faves, Ryan Macbeth, on the show. It's a great conversation. 2 main topics. Number one, he just did a video about how the military-industrial complex is, at its most kindly, misunderstood, and as he puts it, non-existent. And then we get into talking about some of the facts on the ground in Gaza. We get into a little bit of a back and forth on misinformation. It's a good one. I highly recommend it. But that's Friday. Till then, this is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, still more discuss politics, but this is the only show that dares discuss all 3.